You bet. So,
Yeah, anyway, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to reschedule. I recognize how important this is and want to be a part of this process, and I think it's important that everyone participate in it. And so this morning my heart sank, obviously, for having a family emergency, but I was like, I feel like Mark is going to think that this was a well-orchestrated.
I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and start now. So Chase Carlisle, great to have you here for the CA editorial board interview. Appreciate you coming in. We're going to walk through several questions for your district race, but first, let's start with this one, and it is, why are you in the race, and what do you want to accomplish if you're elected?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a great question, and it's one of those things where I feel like people are like, well, what's your favorite movie or song? And you're kind of like, the simple answer is I'm running for Memphis City Council, Super District 9, Position 1, which a lot of people I know do get confused by. It represents about half the city, parts of Midtown, East Memphis, parts of Fraser, Raleigh, Cordova, Southwind Eads, which won't be a part of the city here shortly due to the de-annexation, and down into Hickory Hill and bits of Parkway Village. It's one of 4 city council members that are supposed to represent their constituents. And I decided to run in this race after a lot of thought and prayer and conversation with people whose opinion I trust dearly. And some have been in these seats before me. Some are leaders in the community, some are family members, some are just friends. And I think that there's a real opportunity to serve the city of Memphis. My father was not from Memphis, was an adopted son of Memphis, was in downtown and stayed downtown and invested in the city in his 50 years or 40 years of doing business here. And I think he left me with the, if you believe you have an opportunity to serve, you're required to do so. And I felt like this was a way in which I could serve my community outside of just being a businessman or supporting charities financially or with time. I think that I like to think, barring edging on hubris, but that I've got the knowledge and experience and empathy and compassion and emotional IQ to understand the issues that are going to come down the pipeline, and most importantly, be able to work with those that are on the council to really find where our common ground is and move things forward. What I hope to accomplish out of that is very, very simply stated. I've got 3 children that live in the city. We are invested in Memphis, and so the indirect benefit to me is that my children have a better place to live in than when I found it. And I think we always want to continue to push to see how we can be better and how the city can be better. Complacency is a dangerous thing, and so we should always be looking for ways to improve ourselves and improve our community, and that's what I really hope to accomplish.
So your position you're running for is it's a citywide position essentially because of the size of the population and the size of the area that it represents.
That's right.
So it covers a range of communities. You mentioned Hickory Hill, you mentioned Parkway Village, but it also currently includes areas that are much more affluent than those two. How do you bridge the gap there and make sure you're connected with both communities and providing the resources and services that one needs that the other might not need at all?
Yeah, simply you have to do the work. I think we need people in city council that genuinely want to be there to be servant leaders. I have spent as much time as I humanly can. My wife wants this to be over, at least the election piece of it. I think she knows what we're in for should we win. But you got to get out into the community. It's just that simple. You have to be accessible and available. You have to really want to go and meet with community leaders, meet with organizations, go knock on doors. I've knocked, you mentioned the amount of people. It's impossible to knock on every door, but I've knocked on about 2,000 doors in the city so far, and it's been more meaningful than any other thing that I think I've done, along with going and meeting with church groups and meeting with community groups, and trying to hear, hey, this is what's important to me. There are common themes. There always kind of are, but then there are things that are specific to those communities that they would like to see. I think when you go down to Parkway Village and you talk and you see what they're trying to do in Hickory Hill, it kind of marries into that. But you look at things like Memphis Merit Academy. It's a group of community leaders that have a common vision to want to better their youth, better their community, and redevelop an old Ace Hardware store into a charter school. And they stayed true to that vision and really made something special of not only rehabilitated use of an old building, but also something that will have meaningful community impact today and a generation from now. You look at things like the Parkway Village Library. You know, that may not be as important to someone in East Memphis, but when you go down to Parkway Village, that library serves so many uses. It's important that it's continued to be reinvested in, that it's continued to have attention to, that it's well taken care of. It serves as a job center. It serves as a safe place. It's a cooling center in the summer. It's a heating center in the winter. It's a youth activities there. When I was there this summer, they had about 15 kids in there that were going through learning about robots and how mazes worked. There was a young lady in there that was applying for a job, and I think there's a disconnect understanding that a lot of jobs are filed online today. And so if you don't have access to a computer or internet, you know, that is your job center. And so, you know, it's just continuing to be engaged with all communities and trying to address those concerns. I don't know that there's one specific answer, but engagement.
So you mentioned the 2,000 doors approximately you've knocked on. What have you determined from those visits and other visits in the community are the top 3 issues you've got to address if you're elected to this office?
You know, I feel like you hear this every cycle and probably in a lot of primary major cities, and secondary and tertiary, but the common themes are people fear for crime/public safety. Depending on the time of year, we certainly hear about potholes. Closer to the winter time, they start to rear their heads. But we generally, you know, I'll use the term infrastructure. It's broad, but day to day, people are talking about potholes, but they're also talking about making sure that trash is picked up along the side of the road. They're talking about their garbage services. You know, people that live in the Cordova neighborhoods that are on the perimeter of the city that maybe aren't core or centrally located get very frustrated. Blight in general, code enforcement, and then I tag that all under kind of that city service infrastructure, kind of the auspices of that. The last thing is economic development, but that also is a broad umbrella. What I think I'm really hearing, and I think Ted Evanoff touched on it this morning, even though I didn't get to finish the article, this idea of because they kind of touch each other, right? While our economy is great, you know, who in Memphis is really employed? Yes. Are they prepared to be employed? Do they have access to that employment? What role does the city government have in job training? What role does it have in transportation? What role does it have in economic development? How do we we mentioned this earlier as we were talking about, you know, random acts of violence in areas like downtown versus other areas of town. I don't want to get out of my breadth here. I'm not in law enforcement. I haven't studied the data like others have, but I think the general feeling would be that most people choose crime as a necessary means. You got a 15-year-old kid that wants to help support his family or needs access to cash, and they don't have opportunity, and so they choose an easier road because someone in their neighborhood told them it was easy, and they're set up in a cycle that they may not ever have a chance to get out of. And so I think we've got to figure out economic development opportunities, which is just creating opportunity in general for people. 19 to 24 is a very dangerous age, we know that. You talked to Judge Dan Michael about the recidivism rates when people come into his system. So I know I'm long-winded on it, but
this is you segued into a couple areas that I wanted to go down the path of opportunity youth as well as economic development. Let me do youth first, since you brought that up just now. Memphis, as you well know, is one of the nation's leader. I think it may be the leader in the number of youth from 16 to 24 who have neither a job nor are they enrolled in school.
That's right.
Opportunity, because they of course have the opportunity to do something that you described, something bad. What methods would you employ? What would you do to try and address that issue?
Well, you know, I know education continues to be a topic of conversation in the relationship with the city of Memphis and the Shelby County school system. I think that the city government has a role to play in its youth and its education. I think for the city of Memphis today, its role needs to be supporting. We're already supporting universal needs-based pre-K. The data is there. I know people like to argue over it. it would be my belief that it tends to lean into setting children up for a higher path of success. The question is what do you do to link them to third grade literacy and being prepared? I think the city of Memphis can play a large role in supporting mentoring programs, getting people out to help read to children, to support them after school activities. So that's kind of on the earlier end. When you start getting into that 16 to 18, and then of course post high school education, we've got to look at work programs, and I think it's called Memphis Hire, setting people up with internships, getting them prepared. I think a lot of times, especially, I've spoken to a lot of community leaders in the Binghamton area, and it's fascinating. Again, you talk about these disconnect in cultures. There are several youth that may have never been out of the Binghamton neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so if they're not exposed to even the things that our city has to offer them, how would one expect them to know that there's opportunity and hope there for them? Mm-hmm. And so we as the city need to continue to encourage groups like Boys and Girls Club and work with them and find ways to help them get the word out about these programs, how people can access these programs. I think the other thing, and this is more of a state level, but you've got opportunities with, it used to be the Hope Scholarship. I told you I was gonna have a moment here this morning, but Tennessee Promise. There are opportunities for job readiness and technical skills and vocational skills. And vocations have changed, right, over the last 25 years. There are still your hard trades, but now we've moved into a different type of manufacturing job. It's more high-tech oriented. And so how do we provide people with those skill sets and get them ready to go?
So you talked about access, you talked about job opportunities, kind of all centered around transportation and issues around getting people to job centers. What is your position on that, and how do we get it to be a more serviceable system?
Yeah, it is a great question. I think that's a bear of a question. If I knew the answer if I knew that one thing, right, that we could do, boy, I'd feel pretty smart. What I know is that MATA serves a large number of routes. I know what let me say this from the start over. I know what a lot of people know that have read the paper. I'm not involved in MATA's board. I don't follow their financials. What I know from reading is that it seemingly we don't have enough effective routes that run on a more consistent basis, and it creates a large difficulty specifically for certain people based on whether they've got to walk 3 miles and wait 2 hours, or their entire commute is long. We need to find ways to make sure that we can get these people to the job centers, and I'm 100% committed on doing that. I just don't know today what the fix is. I know that the question is there a fee? Is there a tax raise? Should there be more of an allocation to MATA? I think we've got to look at what we can do with what we have today and with our partners at MATA. I'm really excited that the Shelby County government has stepped in and been a part of that. I know and I recognize that people that live in certain parts of town or the county that don't have access to those routes may be a little ruffled by that, but we are a regional hub. We are a regional economic driver, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I'll use another rising tide should lift all boats, and I know that was one of the questions. We cannot look in a silo. I've been really excited about what has occurred between the county government and the city government over the last several months and maybe a couple of years, as they have really learned to start to work together. I think people have short-term memory about what it used to be like. Hey, look, you go play in your sandbox and I'll play in mine. We were never going to move forward in a meaningful way. So I know that probably doesn't answer that as specifically as you may hope for, but I recognize that there is a desperate need that we get people to the places that they need to be in our workforce. I just don't have that.
Sure. So Mayor Harris is trying to get 10 million towards the 30 million that is needed for the short term aspects. In return, he wants 2 seats on the board. Would you support that? Would you support going up 2 seats, giving up 2 seats? What is your stance on his request for 2 board seats in return for the county giving?
Yeah, so the city of Memphis doesn't have any voting board members. I recognize what he wants to do, right? If you looked at this from a private equity side, right? Hey, your company's worth X. I'm gonna make a capital infusion of wine. I'm taking 2 board seats. Welcome to the world of Carlisle. Nelson. Hey, welcome to the show. You want my capital? Here's the cost of it. I understand where he's going with that. I don't have a strong position today because I haven't had probably the depth of knowledge of the operations and the board. I think it needs to be a more meaningful conversation of what the intent and role of the Shelby County government is going to be and the Memphis City government is going to be, and the independence of that in itself, right? We could have the same conversation about MLGW. We could have the same conversation about the Shelby County school boards. I believe the intent was to keep those bodies independent so they weren't politicized in that way. So the answer is I don't know. But I look forward to having a conversation and trying to understand it better of what he thinks the role and intent. I think that the base guess would be that, hey, it's my money. I want to make sure it's invested well. And I think, again, the city's response to that would be, when people say, hey, what about the Shelby County School Board? And so.
Could you talk a bit about your work experience and your business experience and how it sort of informs who you are as a potential community leader and public official?
I spent a long time in a mid-sized family business. We had the opportunity to do various amounts of work, everything from, running your financials, running a business, running hospitality and restaurants, running real estate development paths, understanding how we purchase insurance, how human resources works. So from a hard skill standpoint, everything under the sun, because it all comes through there. So, things like dealing with pension and benefits, things like, well, I shouldn't say pension, but things like dealing with benefits and 401ks, hiring, best practices, financing, working with large lenders on large recapitalizations of companies, or things that I've done many, many times. I think at my time at Carlisle, we did over half a dozen, maybe more, mergers and acquisitions of companies. And that's the hard skill. The other thing in a company like Carlisle that's family oriented and where we're positioned is learning empathy and compassion. We want to ensure that our people are taken care of and that they know they're cared for. Much like our citizens, we don't work for ourselves, we work for our employees because our employees provide our real opportunities in life, and so they need to be loved on and cared for. Since leaving Carlisle, we've started a small business here. So ground up, we have about 25 employees from 2 years ago, and so I recognize how to grow and build.
So let's talk economic development. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about economic development strategy and particularly the use of incentives in Memphis to lure companies here. You, of course, familiar with pilots as well as tax financing and other sort of incentives. What would be your philosophy on how to use those to both lure companies here and also promote the companies that stay and grow?
Yeah. So first thing is to say, I don't think there's a single person in the city, in businessman, business person or otherwise, that wakes up in the morning and it's like, let's see how we can give away something or inject in capital. But the reality is, the matter is that we are competing for the retainment of businesses that are here, and we are competing for net new businesses with peer cities and peer states. And there is a set of tools that are out there and available, and I'm sure there are some that we don't utilize that could be. TIF financing, by the way, is something that is, I would call, relatively new. When you go to Nashville, they don't use pilots like we have typically for single-use projects. They've done a lot of their projects on single-purpose TIF financing. We're a little different. Now, you're starting to see a bleed over, right? So my response to that is the base would be to say that I'm prepared to use whatever tools in the toolbox we can to be competitive. It is important that we communicate that Memphis is ready and open to do business. I think we are very beneficial that we are in a state that is known for being business friendly. I know that we do not and should not compare ourselves to Nashville, but I think we should greatly benefit from what has occurred up there. Nashville has grown at an exponential clip. They are struggling from infrastructure issues. They are struggling from a massive increase in the cost of living there. You see it in their housing prices, you see it in their apartment prices, you see it in their hotel market. And that is great to aspire to that. But that is also, I think, our competitive advantage. We are in the same state, we have a more affordable cost of living, and so we just need to communicate to the world that we are, the Shelby County Commission, the City of Memphis government, and our governing bodies, whether it is the Downtown Memphis Commission, the Edge Board, or the IDB, that we are competent and capable of getting it done. Should we need to? I think we need to pursue incentives, and I think I said this in my response, I think we need to pursue incentives that are meaningful. We don't just need to go give it away to somebody that's chasing them. We need to be pursuing incentives that are meaningful, that create long-term, well-paid wages into salaried positions. I mean, we need to be chasing the right companies.
Since you can represent a portion of the community that includes such wide disparity in income inequality, as well as communities that don't have much retail or business development, would you have any method or way of trying to tie an area that's hot, Midtown, downtown, East Memphis, a development there into a development benefits agreement for a place that doesn't have nearly as much development, North and South Memphis, for example?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think philosophically, one of the things we all continue to hear is, well, downtown and Midtown are kind of getting theirs. What about what's going on? It's really interesting too when we have that conversation. You look at the retail corridor that is Cordova, right? It's powerful. We always typically look at critical mass, right, and having to grow out of critical mass. And what occurred in many cities across the United States, and specifically to Memphis, and exacerbated by more social issues with the desegregation of schools and people moving out into the suburbs, is that our urban core was eviscerated probably in a much more rapid pace, I think, than other cities now. The good news is there's been this need, this revitalization of wanting to come back into the urban core and kind of grow from within back out. I think that we, the city, need to have a better partnership and give more meaningful, teeth isn't the right word, means maybe might be the right word, for local CDCs, people that are in their communities day in, day out. You look at something like Tillman Cove, right? That is a meaningful project. You look at, brain is stopping. The gentleman that's running the Fraser Development.
Steve Lockwood.
Thank you.
Yeah, very, very impressive operation.
Yes. So, and I think the mayor is positioning, and Housing and Community Development is starting to position that, how do you provide some economic incentive and meaningful capital that can have some more exponential impact to the community and around it. It's very difficult, however, and I think this is the ongoing debate is, can you force private capital into an area that private capital typically wouldn't go? And what is that arbitrage that makes up the return for institutional or even non-institutional capital to want to be there and profit?
How much of a subsidy do you need to make it worth the while to move there?
If I'm Joe Blow and I'm from out of town, and I don't really care about Memphis, which I know people want more, local investment, but I'm just going to put X number of dollars in. I'm looking for extra return, and my capital is probably going to go somewhere else. You may convince them of maybe taking a little bit less return because of the civic nature of what they're doing, but they're not going to take a loss. There are people here in this city, civic leaders, that have invested in projects such as Crosstown and others, and I really shouldn't have said that, that are proud and happy to be behind the scenes and do something of civic nature, but how many of them are there really? And so we have got to continue to look at programs and again, back to the toolbox of what is out there that we can help to support investment and development in these communities that is long-term. What I really don't like is sometimes I think cities get in this nature of they'll build something really shiny and new and then kind of move on to the next groundbreaking, and then nobody comes back to really check to see if we've really positioned that for a generational change. But you look at things like blight programs, cleaning up blight. I saw that Smokey what the county commission did.
Yeah.
Great. It got it in the hands of somebody that's in the neighborhood, that wants to do something about it, that is no longer sitting on tax rolls. Now, it's in a nonprofit, I get it.
Yeah.
But these are people that want to develop and invest in their community. Now the question is, do they have the resources? Do they actually have the financial capability, and how do we look at supporting that? And is it local dollars? Is it state? Is it federal? Is it a combination? You look at what happened in the Main to Main, that was private dollars and the Tiger Grant. I mean, that's meaningful. So I think we just have to continue to work it and see what programs are out there.
So here's a question that's a little bit of a different type of question, and it concerns if you were elected, you certainly sit on a body with 13 members, and you have a budget to look over, and you work with the mayor, and there's a certain official part of the job, but you also behind the scenes have a bigger platform. What would you use your platform to advocate for and to draw attention to in this position?
So just to make sure, you're saying, hey, look, you're going to be a public figure. You got to pulp it. Don't be a bully with it. Yeah. Look, I'm always going to advocate for Memphis, and I know again that's kind of like, great guy. We hear that all the time. Go Grizz, right? But I think that there is there are portions of the population that have this unbelievable pride about this city. And you see it when you talk to employers and human resources and headhunters when they meet with people that they're trying to lure to come to the city to work for a firm, where they're like, I really don't want to come to Memphis. I just give them about 6 months and then go back and talk to them. Go talk to, it used to be Nancy Coffey, and I forget the young lady I should call it the young lady, the woman that leads New Institute now, but
Anna Mullins.
Thank you, Anna Mullins. She used to work for Nancy. But you talk to her about the Swell of Pride and programs like that. I think that there's also a portion of the population that is very pessimistic about Memphis. And we kind of touched on this earlier, whether they're in the suburbs or in the city, it's kind of like they're almost waiting every time for something to happen so they can just do the told you so. It was only a matter of time. This place is going to, hell in a handbasket. And so I think part of that is continuing to use that voice to look at all the good things that we have going on. It doesn't mean that we turn our head and don't focus on the issues that Memphis really needs attention to. I think I also want to advocate and get in and for all Memphians. I mean, we cannot. I know that there is a narrative out there that the business community is only looking out for the business community. I wouldn't be in this race if that was my sole purpose. I think it is incumbent upon us to return pride to communities that feel like they are neglected, that they have had economic development hasn't come their way, or that they've been left behind. I don't think those communities expect to get everything under the sun, but what they'd like, I think, is a voice and someone that's going to listen to them and that's going to take up the causes for them and present them. And on the body, that's important. There are 13 different people with 13 different life perspectives, and we're not always going to agree. And we've got to find the common ground that we can, and we've got to build relationships. My focus is to build relationships on that body so that we can continue to move Memphis forward together.
Here's a little bit of a sidebar question, and that is, as yesterday we asked about barbecue restaurants. I won't put you in the spot to pick your favorite place, but I will say if you've got friends coming from out of town, they've only got 2 hours to spend
You dog.
in Memphis, what are the 2 places you would take them in Memphis?
Golly.
You want to show off your city.
Man. I think I would start at the National Civil Rights Museum, because that tells a story of where this city was. And I think I'd take them to a Grizzlies game, because I think that shows where we are.
Okay.
I think that's really powerful.
Last question, unless my colleague has another one.
Just one quick one. What's your position on super districts? We've heard a lot of people talk about eliminating them in favor of individual districts. Where do you stand?
Yeah, sure. And I know it's a hot topic. It's a hot topic on the federal level, and as far as sentencing and redistricting is coming. I don't have a strong position today in the fact that I'm open. And the reality is I hear the pros and cons on both sides. Obviously, our county commission has switched over. So I don't have a strong position one way or the other. I'm open to hearing the arguments on both sides of, and honestly, I'd like to talk to the county commission, and hear from them how they feel like it's been going. I think that what I understand about those that are very pro single member districts is it's smaller, it's more accessible, and whether it's 13, 15, 18, right? So I think Nashville, when they got rid of their duplicitous government, they've got somewhere in the 30s city council members. The idea being that if it's more retail politics, then people that are potentially unable to raise more capital than other members running in a race, that they may have a better shot and that they can respond to their citizens. People that believe in super districts, I've heard, are more akin to the idea of, if I represent half the city, then I won't get bogged down into fighting for my neighborhood. I can take a more holistic approach to representing while advocating for my district, but because it's so big, I can advocate for things that are in the holistic interest of the city. So I don't have a strong position, but I know that it's going to be coming down the pipeline very soon. And I like to think that, again, I'm going to approach something without prejudice and take a rational, reasonable, what is in the best interest of the city approach.
Last question, and that is, you've been now in the race for several months, traveling throughout the community with 2,000 votes you knocked on. What have you learned about yourself and your city in that process?
What I've learned about the city of Memphis is that people here care. They want what's best for their neighborhoods. They want to see Memphis thrive. They want to fight. We always, since the grindfather, this terminology of grit and grind, I think people genuinely over the last 10 to 15 years, it feels like this swell of, we can do this, guys. I mean, look at all that's been accomplished. And I know that it's not been at the rate and pace or velocity really that everybody wants it to be at. And I know it's not in every community that it wants it to be at. But I think people are really starting to see that our best years truly, the potential of Memphis truly is right there on the horizon. We seemingly finally almost have our books in order. We're starting to turn the corner. We're starting to really have some choices. And I think if the city would just hang with it just a little bit longer. It's really hard. These governments, like a corporation or like they're super tankers. We can't change course, in some meaningful way overnight. It's 1 degree to port, 1 degree, and just hang with us. Stay the course. We will do this together. I think for me,